This is the next installment of the Marvel Superhero Storybook Library, Marvel's Wolverine, an origin story. Many years ago, in the heart of the Canadian wilderness, lived a savage animal. The Wolverine, as it was called, was small but fierce. It liked to be alone, but ventured out to hunt for game when it felt hungry. It was stout but quick. Others lived here too, on an estate amid the wilderness. There were 2 children named James and Rose, and there was another boy who was nicknamed Dog. Dog's father, Logan, lived there too. He was the groundskeeper. And the estate belonged to young James's father, John Howlett. James had once had a brother, but in those days people did not know much about science or medicine, and his brother had died. Ever since his death, it had felt like something was missing from the estate, and no one felt this more than James's mother. She rarely left her room and did little besides think about James's brother. This left her little time for James. But for all the sadness in the big place, James had happy times there too, mostly with his friends Rose and Dog. They played together, worked together, grew up together. But Dog, whose father had treated him badly, became mean as he grew older. And Dog began to dislike James, in the same way the groundskeeper disliked James's father. And one night, Dog and his father broke into the Howlett home and crept upstairs. They were angry and jealous and wanted to fight. James felt scared and angry too, and suddenly his hands started to feel strange. He needed to defend his family and his friend Rose. And without warning, James discovered he was something more than human. But Rose knew people might see James as something less. She grabbed James by the wrist and they ran from the house. James couldn't save his family, but Rose could save James. She took what they needed and they snuck aboard a train. They needed to go someplace no one knew them. Someplace no one would hurt James. They arrived in a mining town and met a man named Smitty, who was head of the worksite. Smitty told James to remove his gloves. He wanted to see if his hands were good enough for working. Rose was scared. She thought Smitty would see James's wounds from his claws, or worse, the claws themselves. But when James removed his gloves, there were no scars. Even though it seemed impossible, James had healed. In order to keep their secret safe, Rose told the townspeople that James's name was Logan. Logan took some hard knocks, but he always picked himself up. As Logan grew up, he eventually left Rose and his old life behind and learned to control his abilities. Logan also learned to be strong and stand up for himself and others, and always do what he knew was right. Not only did he still have claws and the ability to heal easily, but Logan also learned that he had an animal's sense. He could see, hear, taste and smell and feel as well as any wild animal. Logan loved being in the wild, and for a time he left behind his life at the camp to live there. Time continued to pass, but Logan didn't grow much older. His healing ability kept him young. Logan left the woods and began to travel the world. He fought in a great war. Then he fought in another. And during peacetime, he settled in Japan. Upon returning home, Logan was kidnapped. The people who took him hooked him up to a machine. They knew that his healing power would help him survive their experiment. They erased his memory and coated his bones and his claws with an unbreakable metal called adamantium. Logan managed to escape into the forest. He ran and ran until he could run no more. He might have died if he hadn't been found. Luckily, James and Heather Hudson found Logan and nursed him back to health. But the only thing he could remember was his name, Logan. James Hudson had been working for the government on a superhero project called Department H. He called himself Guardian, and Heather called herself Vindicator. James thought Logan would make a good hero too. He gave Logan a costume and a code name, Wolverine. Together, Guardian and Wolverine formed a superhero team called Alpha Flight. But often, Wolverine went out on missions alone. Wolverine led Alpha Flight into many victorious battles. But even though he was proud of Alpha Flight and cared deeply for James and Heather, he didn't feel at home. Wolverine still felt alone. He spent a lifetime searching, and he eventually found the family he was looking for. He joined a team of mutants. Like him, they were outcasts. Each was a loner, but together they were a team called the X-Men. He has been called many things: James, Logan, a Canadian hero, and X-Men. But the one thing that will never change, the one thing he will always be, is the unstoppable Wolverine. The end. Thanks for listening. Stay tuned for the next chapter of the Marvel Superhero Storybook. Like and subscribe for more videos.